almost a dozen years ago. And that vaccine, 1 in 100,000 or so children, between 10 and 100,000 children, got a condition called intussusception, which is where basically the intestine telescopes upon itself, and it can cause a big problem. It can require surgery to fix. So in the U.S., the risk-benefit was, well, even if 3 children get this problem, we can't approve this vaccine. But if the U.S. rejects a vaccine, then do you think Bangladesh can reject that vaccine? Or will reject that vaccine? Absolutely. They don't want anything inferior in Bangladesh. But yet, from the standpoint of risk and benefit, this vaccine had huge benefit in Bangladesh, but was colored by a regulatory decision in the U.S. Tells you what the impact can be. Another element is I was in Kenya in the fall of 2007. I was meeting with the health minister, and the health minister was basically white as a sheet. She'd just come from speaking to the U.S. ambassador in Nairobi. And she said, the U.S. ambassador told me that because they're fighting over the budget for 2008, that I should expect a 25% reduction in my PEPFAR allocation. This is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, pays for a lot of the HIV medicines out there in the developing world. She said, tell me which 25% I should write a death sentence for. So we think of it as a political battle. But out there, that political battle translates into life and death. And maybe I'll end my stories with the story about what's happening right now with pandemic flu. Well, you've heard of H1N1 flu. Well, let me tell you, it could be pretty bad next year or this fall. Right now, the case fatality rate is relatively low. There's lots of reasons for it, but the history of pandemic flus is that the second season is much worse than the first season. And the case fatality rate is relatively low because right now we're putting people on respirators when they need respirators. But the 1918 pandemic, the case fatality rate was not high. It was only 1.8%. So it was relatively low. We could get there. Now, Chris Murray, an economist and a health service research person at the University of Washington, did a study, modeled what pandemic flu would look like if it had the characteristics of the 1918 pandemic and occurred in today's world. 62 million people would die, but 96% of the deaths would occur in the poorest countries in the world. Now we have a solution for this problem. We can make a vaccine. But the problem is the amount of vaccine we can make doesn't equate to the number of people in the world who will need the vaccine. So the richest countries in the world are tying up all the manufacturing capacity. The U.S. is putting in orders for hundreds of millions of doses. The British, the French, the Swiss, the Germans, the Japanese, they're putting in the orders. And the poorest people in the world have no access to this vaccine. And I think we should all stand in line, right? I mean, they're the ones who are going to die. They're the ones who probably need this vaccine more than us. But our policy is focused on saving Americans. So this is something to think about. It's a real issue today, and I think we're going to have to address it. Well, I could go on telling stories, but I don't really think we have all night to talk about them. But I do want to say that the battle against death and misery is stark and real. It's not fiction. It's not something that's just exciting. It's really miserable. And I really believe there's no bigger test for society today than the challenge of global health. And how we address it will really have a huge impact on what kind of world we live in from here on going forward. There's a lot of interest. There's a convergence of science and money and interest into this problem. We just have to have you tell the stories so that it stays top of mind, that it will become a key element of American policy or global policy, and that together we can meet this challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yamada, for that excellent talk. Well, next, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, Dr. Neal Baer. Dr. Baer is a physician, a pediatrician, and was the former executive producer of the show ER. He is now executive producer of Law & Order Special Victims Unit. In addition, for close to 2 years, Neal has closely mentored Alcides Soares, one of the 500,000 Mozambican children who have lost their parents to HIV and AIDS. Neal worked with Alcides to help him make a documentary about his life called Home is Where You Find It. In addition, happily for Hollywood Health and Society, Neal is the co-chair of our advisory board. We'll show you a clip of a recent global health-related episode of Law & Order SVU tonight. Then we have Peter Blake, who is co-executive producer of House on the Fox network. Peter has written for ABC's The Practice and has also written feature film scripts for Universal, Focus Features, and Paramount. He's currently working on a House episode that features an infectious disease normally found in Africa. Peter was also consulting producer on an episode about tuberculosis called TB or Not TB, and I'll show you a clip of that tonight. Next, we have J. David Harden, who is a former executive story editor and writer for Numbers on CBS. While there, he wrote an episode called Harvest, about the global trafficking of human organs. For that episode, David won the Sentinel for Health Award from Hollywood Health and Society. You'll see a clip of that show tonight. David has also developed pilots for Warner Brothers Television and has published fiction with a specialty in science fiction. We look forward to hearing from these amazing storytellers and watching some short clips of their work. Additionally, we have some top global health experts here this evening. I'd like to introduce first Dr. Larry Barrett. Dr. Barrett is a senior malaria advisor at the United States Agency for International Development. Dr. Barrett is one of the world's foremost authorities on malaria control. He's a physician in internal medicine with his master's degree in public health and was formerly with the World Bank and now works on the $1.2 billion President's Malaria Initiative. We're also very fortunate to welcome Dr. George Rutherford. Dr. Rutherford is an expert on global HIV and AIDS. At the UCSF School of Medicine, he is director of the Prevention and Public Health Group. He is also the Salvatore Pablo Lucia Professor of Preventive Medicine and head of the Division of Preventive Medicine and Public Health. He was formerly the state epidemiologist for California, director of the AIDS office for San Francisco, and director of immunization for New York City. Please join me in welcoming all of our distinguished panelists. And now we'll hear from our moderator and panelist, Dr. Neal Baer.
Thank you, Sandra. As Dr. Yamada said, that the challenges are vast but not daunting. Certainly, as writers, we often think that it's difficult to do a show about something happening outside our own purview, and that's a pretty parochial attitude, I think, because with a little cleverness, one can tie into these issues, but it takes some thinking and actually partnering too, and there are a lot of organizations that can give support, and certainly through Sandra as well, that they're there to provide all the background information one needs, be it on malaria or the guinea worm or schistosomiasis or whatever you decide you want to do that is a topic that Americans don't know much about. And I think there's an attitude on the part of the networks, unfortunately, but changing some, that the audience isn't interested in those things. But as long as it's a good story, and Dr. Yamada certainly gave us a lot of grist for good stories. I mean, how do you tell a story? In Mozambique, there are 25 million people, but there are only 350 doctors. So how do you tell these stories? It's a challenge, but it's very good for the creative mind. So I'm gonna show you, I guess now, a clip from SVU, and then we'll move on to Peter. And what we'll do is, for the structure of the panel, is that each panel member will talk for 5 minutes, and they'll show the two other writer producers will show clips, and they'll talk for 5 minutes, and I'll ask them each a question to sort of focus in on what they're doing, and then the other experts will speak for 5 minutes, and I'll ask a pointed question, and then we'll open it up for you so that then you can ask questions that you may have of any of us. Okay, so this clip was inspired by an unfortunate case where a child was brought in with pneumonia, and it turned out the child had PCP pneumonia, but that's so rarely seen now because of antiretrovirals, and the child died because the child had advanced case of AIDS, which is extremely rare to see, fortunately, in the United States now, but not so uncommon still across the world, particularly in Africa and in parts of China and India. So I was interested in that, and as a pediatrician as well, and I was also interested in some very renowned scientists who claimed and said they had conducted research that AIDS doesn't really exist, and that the HIV virus is really not the cause of AIDS. So here you go.
Yes, handles abandoned kids.
What's happened to her is a crime. Kids only get this sick when they're not treated.
Treated for what?
HIV.
She has AIDS.
Yeah, advanced. And her parents didn't do a damn thing about it.
Want to see some hocus pocus? Check out Dr. Demento's website.
The truth about HIV.
There's no proof that HIV causes AIDS. The anti-HIV medications Big Pharma makes will kill you.
This guy is a fruitcake.
According to Hutton, AIDS is a global conspiracy funded by pharmaceutical companies to make big bucks.
And commit genocide. My parents believe the government created HIV in a lab, and the CIA spread it in the prisons to kill blacks and gays.
How does a doctor believe this crap?
He's an AIDS denier, part of a misguided minority who believes that HIV doesn't cause AIDS and that AIDS itself doesn't exist.
2/3 of the world's HIV-positive kids get infected during pregnancy or at birth from the mother. The rest acquire it during breastfeeding.
Okay, so Susan could have passed the virus to Lisa either way.
It's a shame. HIV-positive women in this country have a 98% chance of having a healthy baby if they take antiretrovirals during pregnancy and put the child on meds after birth.
Which Susan probably didn't do because she thinks HIV is harmless.
Yeah, she put Lisa's life in danger by breastfeeding her and by withholding medication when Lisa got sick.
And since any reasonable person knows HIV causes AIDS, that's criminally negligent homicide.
HIV attacks the life-saving T cells that fight disease. The virus genetically mutates the host cell, turning it into an HIV factory, which makes more copies of the virus. Eventually, HIV kills T cells faster than the body can replenish them, destroying the immune system and causing AIDS.
Dr. Warner, can you tell the jury how we know this?
HIV has been isolated, photographed, cultured, and grown outside the human body. Its genetic structure is fully documented, and it's killed more than 25 million people since 1981, including Lisa Ross.
Okay. So, there were two other clips that we didn't show, but about that really got me in trouble when I was in France last year at a global diplomacy conference at the Aspen Institute that talked about the president of Gambia treating AIDS on Thursdays and curing it on Thursdays, and the whole problem in South Africa with denial of HIV. So one can certainly bring these stories to people's attention, and without the knowledge, then there's no action that can be undertaken. You have to know about these issues first and be informed, as Dr. Yamada said before, you can then start to think about and act